With exams approaching, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you've got limited amount of time and you need to focus your efforts on the parts of studying biology that are going to give you the most reward. Now, while I don't recommend ignoring certain parts of the content and specification, I do think that there are parts of the specification that are more important to spend time on than others. This video is going to be a discussion about what those different types of content are and what are the parts of the specifications that you should spend more time working on. So, in my view, there's two main types of content that can be on specifications. The first one is central content and the second one is supplemental content. And the thing is about specifications is that they don't really separate these two out. They're just treated equally in the specification, equally in the textbooks. And so you will invariably, you will just spend kind of equal amounts of time not knowing what's central, what's supplemental. But let's begin by kind of defining what each of these are. Okay, so central content is what I tend to think of as kind of fundamental, often complex, biological processes, okay, or ideas, right? Now, on the other hand, what you have is then supplemental content, which is still kind of biology, will still look like biology, but it's more the examples that help you to understand this fundamental process. So supplemental content would then be things that are examples of the fundamental concept, or it might be kind of applications of that fundamental concept that allows you a better understanding of this thing. Okay, so we're talking about examples of concepts, or we're talking about applications of concepts. So this is the main difference. So how do you recognize whether you're looking at a fundamental concept or whether you're looking at supplemental idea, something that's more of an example of something, or something that's just there to kind of show how an idea, how a biological concept can be applied? Okay. Now, central content is usually what I tend to think of as multi-step processes. Multi-step processes, they take a lot of time, they take a lot of effort just to simply understand what's going on. So multi-step processes that take time and effort in order to understand. Okay, and usually this requires, I mean, you'll see that your teachers are focusing more of their time on these, maybe more questions, more activities in lessons that are simply there to help you understand this concept, and it's less so that you can simply revise your way out of this thing. Okay, so usually it takes time and effort to understand this. You'll see a lot of teacher investment, teacher involvement in this part. Okay, you'll get activities, you'll get questions. Okay, whereas in contrast, supplemental content usually are lists of just facts that are simply examples of how the central idea might play out in real life terms. Sometimes the supplemental content, it might take up a lot of page space. So they're explanations of examples, and they might take up a lot of time for you to go through. They might take up a lot of kind of notes, if you will, but you might find that even though they do take up a lot of space, it might be that you're simply kind of having to memorize that example. So there's a lot of emphasis here on recall rather than understanding. Okay, so recall here, there's going to be description. Okay, but it might not be very difficult for you to understand this concept. Okay, because this is more about connection. This stuff is more about the connections it has with the central concept, the central content. Okay, so connections to the central. Okay, so this is important. Like, this is how you identify what you're looking at. Okay, now we'll go through some examples where we'll kind of see what it is I'm talking about here. Okay, central content is fundamental biological principles that really can't get broken down to anything simpler. Okay, this is what the whole idea is based upon. The supplemental content doesn't really stand on its own. It lives because of its connections to the fundamental idea, the fundamental biological principle or process. All right, so maybe we can add that here, that central content kind of stands, it can stand on its own as something that it doesn't exist by its connection to anything else. Okay, even though I guess one of the things about biology is that somehow everything is connected, but yeah. Okay, so that's central content and supplemental content, what it is, how you identify it. So now what we'll do is we'll look at how you deal with these. So once you've identified something as central content, or once you've identified something as supplemental content, what is it that you do? And so this I feel might be useful to you in terms of how you spend your time with these things. Okay, so central content, it does take a lot of time, and give it that time. Okay, I mean, I would hate to think that, you know, something as important as the immune system and understanding how the immune system works, you know, just because it takes up a couple of pages in the textbook, that people give that just as much time as they might give to just examples of different pathogens, for example, that might also take up 2 pages. Okay, whereas, you know, the ideas, the investment of thinking power that it takes to understand the immune system versus remembering the different types of pathogens is very, very different. Okay, so this is important, that we're willing to identify, we're willing to give more time to the central content versus the supplemental content. So you got time on one hand. Okay, now you've got time, but then also what kind of activity is it that you need to do to understand central content? So, I mean, the primary one is obviously you should expect your teacher to go through this properly with you. Okay. Secondly, any worksheets, kind of activity sheets, they are kind of low level, basic, step-by-step kind of activities that take you forward, like bit by bit, into understanding this bigger idea. Okay, and I would also suggest that, you know, over the years I've kind of subscribed to this idea that, you know, past exam questions are not just there as an assessment tool. Exam questions really test your understanding of very important concepts, big concepts, and, you know, exam questions can be quite varied. And so, and it so happens that central content, you know, your understanding of that content can be interrogated in a wide variety of ways in exam questions. So the more questions you do, the more you're exercising your understanding, testing whether your understanding can meet the demands of questions, and gets you to think about the ideas in more ways, and then prepares you better moving forward for when you have to answer these questions in the future. Okay, so this is how I would deal with central content. Make sure that you can explain it to yourself, have the involvement of teachers, even your friends, peers that do the subject with you. It might be useful to have discussions with them about this. Any basic level activity sheets that you can use, videos, online resources, exam questions is a good one as well. Okay, now supplemental content, that again, exam questions help with that, but here you need to, again, you got to use your time wisely. Here you need to make sure that you're not overspending your time. Okay, so I would suggest here that in terms of supplemental content, it's mainly about recall. It's mainly about making sure that you understand how it connects to the central concept. So understand how the central concept is, or central content is being applied. Okay, so understand link to central content or concept, whatever you want to call it, but understand its link to that. Okay, and here there is ultimately in this case there is a revision. There's a revision focus. Like these examples, these connections to the main concept, it does simply take remembering those ideas. But again, I don't want to simplify it too much. Okay, whereas here there's a strong understanding focus. Now that we've looked at the different types of content, let's look at some examples of what I mean. Okay, so for an example, I've got the OCR 2015 biology specification in front of you here, and I've highlighted the pink regions as kind of the central concepts, whereas I've got in yellow the supplementary content. Like further down is a perfect example of what I mean here. So what I've got in pink here is essentially what is the structure of an antibody and how do they work. That is very, very important to understand. Then you have the supplemental information, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is not important, but what I'm saying is that the yellow stuff, the stuff in yellow, the supplementary content, it rests on your understanding of how antibodies work. And so I'm not saying that it's less important, but what I am saying is if you focus efforts to understand the stuff in pink, the stuff in yellow will automatically should make more sense, and therefore should take less time and effort in order to get through. So while the pink stuff here, so point H is understand what's the structure of an antibody, how does it work. At least I is the different ways that antibodies do their work. So opsonins being how the antibodies result in phagocytosis, agglutinins, another way that antibodies work to help the process of phagocytosis, and antitoxins, the way that antibodies prevent the action of harmful substances produced by pathogens. Okay, but all of that point I rests on this idea of you understanding what an antibody is and how it functions. Okay, and then the next thing you have J, which is the difference between active and passive immunity. Again, that is essentially an application of understanding the immune system. So point F, understanding the roles of lymphocytes in the specific immune response allows you then to discriminate between active, passive immunity and what natural and artificial immunity is. Finally, if you understand what an immune response is, then it allows you to understand what autoimmune diseases are. Can you see how I, J, and K don't stand on their own? They need you to understand F, G, and H, and then they make sense. And if you therefore spend enough time and effort on understanding F, G, and H, I, J, and K will make more sense automatically and therefore require less time for you to spend on them, giving you more time to do more effective things towards preparing you for the exams.